Hi and welcome to this video in the MRDCL Understanding Concept series. And in this video, we're going to be looking at reading data from two files. So where you have data not just in one data file or one sequential set of files that you want to read, but two separate data files. Now I'm going to be covering three scenarios. So scenario one, we're going to look at where a survey has data for each record in each file. So there's a record 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, shall we say, in file 1, and a record 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in file 2. And maybe the reason for that being in two files is perhaps the software you use for data collection couldn't export any more data than that in one run. So you've ended up with two files which both have the same number of records. So you want to read the data from both those files sort of simultaneously. So that's scenario one. Scenario two is slightly different. That's where you have data for every record in file one, but some records don't appear in file two, perhaps because they're shorter records or don't have that optional information that's in the second files, and you want to match up the data from those two files. And the third scenario we're going to look at is where we've got what you might call a one-to-many relationship, where you have perhaps less records in the file that you want to read than in another file. Now, the scenario that you might have there is perhaps you're doing a survey for customers and you have some data from perhaps 5,000 customers that your client has, but you're only surveying 200 of them. So for the 200 respondents that you survey out of the 5,000 customers, you want to match the data in the two files. Now, with all these scenarios, it's certainly quite important that your data is sorted in sequential order on whatever serial or ID you're going to use to match them. You can work in MRDCL with the data unsorted or in a non-sequential order, and there is a tool in MRDCL which tells it to rewind to the top of the file to find its match. However, that's very heavy on processing, and the bigger the file, the further it's got to search. So if you imagine you've got 5,000 respondents and they're just in a random order, on average, each record will be 2,500 records into that file. So when it searches for record number one, it will be on average halfway through that file. Sometimes it'll be at the beginning and sometimes it might be at the end. So the searching and the reading of records is extremely high and heavy on processing. So I always recommend, if you possibly can, to always have your file sorted in sequential order. And indeed, in these examples, that's all we're going to cover. And you might ask also, what if I'm going to read data from three files? Well, the principles in these videos will also carry through to three files, but I think probably there's a bit too much variety in what you might want to do. So we're only going to cover two files in this video, I'm afraid. You'll have to think a bit further or seek some help if you have problems with handling a third file. So let's get stuck into this. Let's deal with our first file, and that's reading two matched files. So if we look at files 1 and 2 here, you can see I've got respondents 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with some data, and you can almost memorize that data. And if we look at file 2, we've got records 1, 2, 3, 4, 9. Now, this is a deliberate error in the data. You would think it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and indeed that's what I expect. But for the purposes of this demonstration here, I've deliberately put an error into the data so that we can trap it and put out a message so that we can respond to it. Because what I'm pretending I'm expecting here is that the two files have records 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or certainly pairs that match up, one from each file. So let's look at the script we need to handle that. It's pretty easy. So let's open up a file and let's work through it. Now, the first thing you need to decide is, what record lengths have I got? Well, these two particular data files are both very short, but they might be of different lengths. And you've got to decide where you're going to store that data when you read it in. Now, in this particular example, they're very short. So I've set the card characters length to 200 characters because that's plenty for my data. But of course, you might need longer. And I'm reading from file A which is file1.asc, so C bracket A bracket equals file1.asc. I'm reading that record by record in 1 to 100, and then I'm reading a card or record from the B file, which is file 2, and I'm storing that in 101 to 200. So if I was to define any variables, if it's coming from file 1, the data will be in fields 1 to 100. If it's coming from file 2, it will be in 101 to 200. So even though it's in 1 to 100 in the second file, as far as MRDCL is concerned, it's storing it and reading it into 101 to 200. Then what I'm doing, I'm putting a check in there, and I'm listing out the contents of 1 to 3, 5 to 8, and 105 to 108 as a test to see what data I'm picking up to make sure it's working. And this is the check I talked about. Now, I said I put a deliberate error in there. You remember in file 2.asc, there was a record 9 that followed record 4. And what I'm doing, because it's good practice to do this, I'm checking the serial number in 1 to 3 matches the serial number in 101 to 3. In other words, the first 3 fields of each record are the same. If the identifier was in a different field, maybe in the second file it was in 7 to 10 or 7 to 9 rather, we could say 107 to 109, and that would work perfectly well. So when I'm finding any discrepancy, I'm putting out a message saying something has gone wrong here and listing it out so I know about it. So let's run this and then just check that what we're getting out from this list statement looks correct. So let's keep it open and run it. And it's run, and you can see I've got 1 write command rejected and 4 read, and that's because of that record number 9 that doesn't match up. I can look at the report file and I can see the data I'm listing out. So I'm listing out record number 1 from the first file, 5 to 8 is 2345. In the second file, it's 8765. Let's check that quickly. File 1. There it is, 2345. The next record is 1111. And if we go to file 2, we can see we've got 8765 in 5 to 8. And that's why it's listing that particular data out. And there you can see the 1111 from the next record. And finally, that 5th record where it lists the data out, but it also gives me the message something has gone wrong because I'm reading record 5 from file 1 and record 9 from file 2. And of course, that's a flaw in my data, which I need to trap. And I have therefore errored it. And that's why only 4 records are written. So that's the first scenario. The next scenario is the same thing, except records in the second file are optional. So if we look at file 3, it's pretty much the same as file 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we look at file 4, you'll see it's only got 1, 2, 4, and 5. 3 is missing. So there's no errors this time, but record number 3 is missing, which is allowed, but we've got to allow for that in the script. If we didn't allow for that in the script, what would happen here is it would read fine for the first record. It will read record 1 from the first file, record 1 from the second file, record 2 and record 2. Then it would read record 3 from the first file and record 4 from the second file, and it would error. And indeed, it's not going to work because once we have that error, the files aren't aligned. So we need some script now that's a bit more intelligent, that can handle those differences in the 2 files. So let's open up our second script in run 2. Here it is. And let's look at what we need now. So we need a little bit more code this time. Again, same principle. CA is file 3, B is file 4. I've set my card characters, and I'm doing the same thing again. I'm going to read the data in the first file into 1 to 100, and in the second file 1 to 101 to 200. But I've got to take a lot more precautions now. So you'll see I'm starting out with a variable here called got both as true. And what got both is telling MRDCL to do is to read from the second file. So let's look at what's happening here. I'll come back to these 2 commands in a second. So when I start at the first time, I read a record from the A file in 1 to 100, just the same as before. If get both is 1, I read from the B file in 101 to 200. Now, you can see when I start, I force got both to be true, so it will read a record from each file. So what it's going to read, looking at our data files, because number 3 is missing from the second file, that will read the first record from file A, that will read the first record from file B. Now I'm setting got both off to false. And what I'm saying now is that if 101 to 103 is equal to 1 to 3, and in other words, if they match, you can now set got both back to true again. Now that will become apparent in a second why I've done that. So I define a variable from the file A, which is from file 3.asc. Now I say if I've got a match, in other words, if the serial number is the same in both files, I want to carry on. If it's not, I want to jump over this variable here because the second card will not be the same matching record. And let's see what happens. So I'm jumping over it. If it's not a match, well, in the case of our data, it is a match for record number 1. So it will define that data. After that jump, I list out what I've got. Here you see now I go back to the top. Now the top is just after that setting of got both. So it's going to retain the value of got both when it comes round. It will know whether the records I've just read matched or not. In other words, if there's one missing, got both will come in here at this point here with a setting of false. Now I'm going to 0 to finish, which means clear the values of all the variables that aren't defined above here. So it won't reset that value or that variable because 0 to finish comes after it, but everything else will get reset. Any other variables I defined will have got reset, like variable 2 here and variable 1 here. Now I can read another record from the A file. And if got both is 1, I read another record from here. But if it's not 1, if it's false, I don't want to read another one. So to take you through the series of things that are going on, bearing in mind that our data here, record 3 is missing from the second file. The first time through, that's going to read record 1, and that's going to read record 1 from the second file. Round it goes, back it comes to the top. Got both will be true, so it'll read record 2. It will read record 2 here. It will go around again. Then it comes to number 3, so it's going to read record 3 from this file, but there is no 3 in the second file, but it will read it. So it's going to read it into 101 to 200, but it will be record 4. So they're not going to match. So when they hit this statement here, got both will have a value of false or 0, which means it's going to jump that data there and fall through here with variable 2 empty. Now, when it comes around the next time, it'll read record 4 from here, but it won't read record 4 the next record because that is record 4 that it's already holding over from reading the previous time. So it reads nothing here because it fails that filter. Now we can go through here again. This time 4 does match 4. If 3 and 4 were missing, it would still not match. So it will go through this circle again. And this time, of course, it will go through all this code here because record 4 does match up in both files. And finally, we go through record 5 for each because they do match again. And when we list the data out, we'll see variable 2 is empty for record 3. It won't be holding the value or displaying the value for record 4 because we've skipped that bit of data here in our code if they don't match. Now, this is an important piece of code here. I never let the records out the bottom here. So you can see this go to top is effectively just once they get inside here is sending them round and round this loop and never letting them out. efill equals done means when I get to the end of the A file, I can fall through done and finish. So that's its escape, if you like, from the file or from this run. Otherwise, it would never get out of this STP file. And efill equals done means when I get to the bottom of the A file, when it tries to read it once more. So when it's read record 5, it will go back to top again. It will try to read a 6th record from the first file, but it won't find one. It'll know it's the end of the file, and it will hit efill equals done and just fall through the bottom and complete your run. So let's run that and have a look and see what happens. And let's look at what we get. And sure enough, we get record 1 matching here. Got both is true. And the values in those two variables are 123 and 987. We can probably see that. So there we are, there's the 987. And if we go back to the next record, that all matches up and looks fine. Now we get to the third record. They don't match here because at this point it's holding record number 4 in the second file. Therefore, got both is empty. Variable 1 has a value, but variable 2 is output as undefined. So it's not picked up or picked up the data for record number 4 because, as you remember, we jumped around it. Then we get to record number 4, everything matches again, and on we go, and record 5, and it's read all 5 records from file 3 and all 4 records from file 4 and processed 5 records. And if we go to our log here, we will see that it's successfully processed all 5 records here because I wanted to read right away records based on everybody in file A. All right, so let's now look at the third scenario, which is where it's a one-to-many relationship. So the second file has a lot of records and only some of those have been surveyed. So let's close again. So here's file 5, and this time we got records 1, 12, 20, 24, and 30. Whereas if we look at file 6, it has all the records from 1 to 32. So if you imagine this is the 32 customers with all their data, but this file here is the 5 that we've surveyed, and we actually only want to process and analyze in our tables these 5 records. We don't want to process the 32, we just want to process the 5 that match. So this time we did a slightly different script, same principles, but if you like the other way round, we're looking to find a match in the other 5 file. So let's open it up. Let's open up run 3 and see what we do here. Very much the same principles, so file 5 and file 6. Again, I'm using that technique of defining got both equal to true. I've got a top and a 0 to finish, just like before. This time, I only read from the survey file or the file A, the file 5.asc, if got both is true. Now, it starts off true, so it reads it the first time, but I always read in a record from file B. Now, this time, we're going to stop processing when we run out of records in file B. Unlike last time when file A was the master because some were missing in B, this time every record will be in B, but only some will be in A. So it's round the other way this time. Same principle, got both equals false. If they're equal, I set it to true. Pick up data from the first record, so on, again, a title. Now this time I'm doing something slightly different. I've got the same principle again. If got both is 1, unless it's 1, I go to jump. But this time, rather than jumping over just the variable, I'm actually jumping over the list statement, and I've added a write statement here. Now the write statement has the effect of where there isn't a write statement, your finished data statement is effectively writing away your records. When there's a write statement, the finished data statement is just the end of the data stage, and the write statement chooses when to write records away. So in this particular case, it's only going to write records away when I get a match, when got both is 1, in other words, when I've got a survey record that matches the master file or the file with the 32 records in. Same principle again, go to top. I don't let people out. I just put them back to the top, except when we hit the end of all the records in file B. So let's run that and see what happens this time. And sure enough, it's read 5 records in total. And here we go. It's got 30 lines it's read from file 6 and so on. So everything looks as though it's worked. And we have 5 records, which would be on our IDF for the tables that we produce if we ran tables from this. If we look at the listing file, everything looks good. We only are processing 1, 12, 20, 20, 24. These match. They've all got both. And these are the values in the data from those 2 files, which you can check back if you want to. So there we are. We've looked at 3 scenarios of how you can process data from 2 files. You can extend this to read from 3 or even 4 files if you've got different files. But I hope this has been helpful to you to look at ways in which you can process data from 2 files where you have respondent data for respondents in separate files. Thanks for joining me, and goodbye.